if you're going to identify mushrooms, you're going to have to use all your senses. You're going to have to look at them, feel them, taste them, smell them. There's a really cool one we may find, which you have to listen to. Okay? This is one of the ones I'll ask you to sniff as you're going around today. And eventually, I hope, we will find some of the species that smells very, very strongly of chlorine. Like the worst maintained swimming pool you've ever been in. It'll really clear your nostrils. This is not one of those, which means that to identify this species, we'd need compound microscopes and stains and lots of patience and keys. So, for today, that's going there. This is an agaricus mushroom. Means it's in the same genus as the supermarket button mushrooms. And when they're not this old, you remember I told you there were no general rules? Well, there is kind of one. I'm going to let you in on it. Okay? Got to promise not to tell anyone. Especially if you use it and die. Well, okay, that should be okay. If you know for absolute certain that your mushroom is an agaricus, okay, then most of them will either smell sweet, like anise or almonds, marzipan, or they'll smell kind of chemically, unpleasant, phenolic. And if they smell sweet, they're good to eat. And if they don't, they're not. The reason that we have trees on Lasqueti Island is because they have fungi attached to their roots. But the reason that we continue to have forests even after that is due to our decomposer fungi and other decomposer organisms. Right? Terrestrial Pholiota. Small but mighty. I've also been handed a very washed out specimen of an orange peel fungus. There's a lot of that all over the island here. Almost everything that we find that we'll call a mushroom is a member of the very large group of fungi called basidiomycetes. Mycetes means fungus. Basidio just means they produce their spores on a basidium, which is microscopic, so there's no way of telling. But the other big group of mushrooms are called ascomycetes, and this is the first ascomycete we've seen. Okay? And so if you look on the surface of this ascomycete, because it's an ascomycete, it would have asci all over it, which are microscopic, long, narrow sacs that each contain 8 spores. And one of the fun things you can do with these, when they're a little less faded than this, is to blow gently across the surface, and oftentimes you get a puff of spores. So just very briefly, more than 90% of plant species on Earth form an association with fungi. Okay? And in that association, the plant produces food, which is what plants do, sends some of it down to the roots, and that's how the fungus is fed. The fungal filaments go through the soil, gather water and minerals and other materials, and bring them back to the plant. And that's the very simple story. But over 90% of plant species, vascular plant species, higher plant species on Earth do this. And the oldest land plant fossils from 400 million years ago have fossil mycorrhizal. Mycorrhizal just means fungus root, and it describes this association. And the fungi are generally called mycorrhizal fungi. Okay? And some of you may be familiar with the concept that trees, in particular, oftentimes have more than one species of fungi attached to their roots. And the fungi are usually attached to the roots of more than one tree. Right? We did a study in the Victoria watershed with big old Fungus carrots. They generally had 12 to 14 different species of fungi attached to the roots. Okay, and these fungi are attached to the roots of different trees. Kind of makes sense from the fungus point of view, because you have to be attached to a living tree or you're dead. So you attach to multiple trees. Fungi will constantly surprise you, I think. Even the very popular oyster mushrooms, which probably a lot of people here like to eat, as do I. Their mycelium produces paralyzing substances which paralyze very small animals while the fungus eats them. Yeah, certainly no oyster mushrooms for vegans or vegetarians, since they are carnivores. This is one of our perennial conchs. That means it will start growing one year and then put on a new layer each year. And so if you look at some of these conchs here, they haven't been growing for too long. This one here, maybe 3 or 4 years. In fact, if you cut it through like this, you can count roughly the number of years it's been growing. It's not as accurate as tree rings, but it gives you a rough idea. And these are always put out with the pore side down, which means that all the conchs that we see on this log here have been put out since the tree became a log. So if you want to know roughly how long this tree, long ago this tree fell down, you could section some of the conchs and see how long it's been putting out brackets in this orientation. We have a bully. Hooray! Yay, bullies! So we were looking at the polypores earlier, and the polypores had pores underneath, and polypores tend to be leathery or woody, but if it's got pores underneath and it's fleshy, it's a bolete. And the boletes are, with one possible exception, mycorrhizal. And this is the fat jack. This is from a group of Pseuilus species which are all called slippery jacks. And this one here has the distinctive feature, if it's fresh enough, or if I scratch the base here, it should turn from yellow to green and blue. So we shall see. This is a real high wire act now that I'm doing this. This one is not turning green for me yet. In fact, maybe it's too rotten to do that, but we'll leave it and we'll see if it turns in time. Oh, one good reminder, and then let's walk on a bit longer. Sorry. The good reminder is this is partly rotten. And a reminder is that more than half of the people who are poisoned by wild mushrooms are poisoned by edible mushrooms. Okay? And that's because they've eaten mushrooms which are rotten, or they've eaten mushrooms and not cooked them, or not cooked them enough. Or occasionally someone will have a food allergy. But for the most part, when people are poisoned by mushrooms, they're poisoned by edible mushrooms. Don't become one of those people. You wouldn't believe what people will eat sometimes. So yeah, this is an edible mushroom. But honestly, it's just rotten. This one was Fomitopsis pinicola most of my adult life. Then a few years ago, they decided it was different from the European species, so it needed a new name. So this is Fomitopsis Mount C, which is named not only after a BC mycologist, but after a female BC mycologist, which is a very rare thing indeed. This is named for Irene Mounts, who studied the fungal decay of airplane-grade Sitka spruce in Haida Gwaii in the 1930s, when it was really important to the war effort for building mosquito bombers, at a time when the world's largest airplane was built of Sitka spruce, right? And then after the war, Irene Mounts got married and promptly lost her federal government job, because at the time, right up until 1955, the federal government did not employ married women. And that, as far as we know, was the end of the mycological career of Irene Mounts, after whom Fomitopsis mountsi is named. But anyway, it's an interesting BC tale. She was a Cumberland gal. And there will be a biography of Irene Mounts by Don Coleman coming out next year. I think published by the Cumberland Historical